a couple if it makes sense if we want to jump into those and kind of
Yeah,
talk
let's
about
jump
like
in.
ways we can solve problems there. So let me let me share my screen off here.
You're clicking buttons. I'm clicking buttons. Here we go. So,
Cool. So yeah, so when it came down to it, like I mentioned, whenever we're trying to do that drawing stuff, it was like, what do we do? How do I solve this? Um, in my first iteration of this was going to the native APIs. So being, a Xamarin developer by and large, and especially nowadays, or at least back in the day, I should say, now being a Xamarin developer, now being like a MAUI developer,
mhm, mhm.
we could come out and make use of all the different like native drawing libraries out there. But
Right,
they behave quite a bit differently. The way that you would draw in iOS is totally different than Android is totally different on Windows and things like that. So that became like, well, I looked into that a little bit and we did a couple of things there, but it was just way too hard to maintain. Um, Another thing that we've looked into, and this has kind of been around in a few different iterations now for a while, but was using like the built-in graphics drawing that was kind of like started a little bit in Xamarin Forms, but now is a little bit more expanded in MAUI, and that's the Microsoft MAUI graphics set of namespaces out there.
okay.
Uh, Essentially, what that is, if you think about it, is it works like how MAUI works, but for drawing. So they took those same types of native drawing libraries, native iOS and Android drawing libraries, Windows drawing libraries, built interfaces around them, and then you can interact with those in a cross-platform manner, right? So again, you've got like the ability to draw different kind of shapes. You could build paths. You could do touch interaction, all that kind of good stuff out there. But it is a little bit limited because again, it's got to be stuff that is available across every platform. You need
Right.
a way to be able to represent that type of stuff. So it's good. And if you've got like some, relatively like basic drawing needs, if you got to draw a circle or a rounded rectangle, that kind of
Right.
stuff,
Right.
it's great. Just use it. It's easy enough. You don't have to take on any dependencies or do anything like that. Um, but for me, like what I wanted to do is to build like a UI controls library. So this is ours. It's free. You can go get to it. It's Aurora Controls MAUI. I wanted to make something that would allow us to like solve all of our problems across every platform, even platforms that I don't know about in the future, right? And so the MAUI piece was good, but is limited to those MAUI platforms. But like, what if I want to do something in Blazor, or what if there's some new platform that comes online? Like, how am I going to support that over here? Um, and that's where like Skia Sharp came into play, or realistically Skia came into play. Um, Skia, you're familiar with it, even if you aren't.
Right.
If you use Chrome, it's using Skia to draw everything. If you're
Okay.
using Android, specific versions of Android, this changes a little bit, but like Skia is used to draw Android. Firefox uses it. It's the basis for Flutter mobile development.
Yep.
Avalonia uses it. Uno uses it.
I didn't know Uno used it.
I don't know that it's the only thing that they use, but I know it's used maybe on certain platforms.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
But it's like really what it is at the end of the day. It's really just a 2D graphics library, and we'll kind of talk about what that all means. But it's like an everywhere library. It's going to work on Windows, your Mac, iOS, Linux, everywhere and anywhere. Performance is pretty good. Obviously, as you could imagine, like anywhere that Chrome is running, it needs to be able to be supported out there. So it's going to have pretty good performance on that because of that. Um, and it's really like simple and easy to work with. Again, I am in no way, shape, or form a like graphics developer. I'm not a game developer. The last time I had to deal with geometry and stuff like that would have been college courses or whatnot,
Right.
So like having something that's simple, it was pretty important to me. And I find Skia to be very simple and straightforward. A lot of the things that you do are very obviously named, or very easy to gain access to and work with. So that's kind of what Skia is. And then Skia Sharp on top of it, then
Real quick, Mike, real quick. I
you
apologize.
got it.
cutting you off. I just gotta. We got some stuff coming in the chat, and a friend of ours, Dan Siegel, says Uno uses Skia all over the place.
It is all
So,
over.
so,
Okay.
so it is all over the place. And then he just is making sure that I'm actually paying attention to him, because that Dan wants my attention. He
keep,
wants to make sure that I'm invested and engaged. So
keep,
Dan, we are paying attention to you, my friend. I don't want you to feel like you go right ahead and chat with us, and we'll drop your stuff right here on the screen so everyone can see it.
keep an eye on Dan. Yeah. He'll correct me whenever I say something.
Yeah, when we screw up, Dan will be like, that's not correct, sir.
He's got us.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's great. Like, again, it's kind of this like this, fairly easy to use graphics library that's supported everywhere. And to make it even better, then we've got wrappers for it for .NET. So, with having it available in .NET, that means that we could then use it in all of our .NET UI platforms. So whether
Right.
we're talking about building a MAUI application, um, if we're talking about building like desktop applications, or even like Blazor applications now, we can build it and use it out there for all those for all those different places. Even for things like my team ends up using it in some places for doing API development, where we have to do image manipulation and things like that as it comes in. So it's this
Interesting.
great, kind of runs everywhere, solves a bunch of problems type of library for us. Built into it then, so if we use Skia Sharp on top of it, not only does it give us access to Skia, but there's also wrappers for it that makes it have that provides views for different platforms. So we have views that give us a canvas for MAUI, views that give us a canvas for desktop, things like that, which kind of enhance it a little bit so that we can have touch interaction support and all that kind of good stuff that you would expect out of kind of like a more GUI centric or UI centric library.
Interesting.
Not only that, then, but there are like a bunch of additional plugins for Skia, which I think, again, just kind of keep on building on it and make it more awesome. Been using it for a long time for rendering out SVG images into our mobile apps. If you've ever done any mobile development and you've ever needed to provide like a graphics, resource, that if it's on Android, you've got to supply like 15 different sizes of a PNG image. If it's
Yep.
on iOS, you've got your like at 2x, at 3x, all those kind of images.
Yeah.
You could just bypass that by just throwing an SVG image, which is just an XML document, into your application, and then just have it read that SVG at runtime and show your icon, which is cool because then it will just scale to whatever it needs to be on that platform. Without any additional work, just one SVG file, which is cool. Other plugins for things like font handling. There is a plugin for doing Lottie animations now as well. So if you want to use, I know that's another thing that's pretty popular, sort of SVG based animations. You could pull in a library and just run Lottie animations straight from there. And like a bunch of other kind of cool stuff. So, a lot of people have done pretty good work around it to supply like different font handling and rendering, different text rendering, different kinds of UI controls. That's that like Aurora controls, like I mentioned. We just built a whole UI set of, whole set of UI controls on top of it. But yeah, makes it like super easy to interact with and really great from like a .NET perspective. So
Interesting. Yeah. Like so the SVG thing that it's funny that you bring that up, right? So like one of the first mobile projects I worked on, we were calling an API, getting some images and pulling some stuffs back. Yeah. And as a result of it, like bits were getting lost. And I told him, I said, none of this would happen if you just gave me SVGs and let me
sure,
just
right?
put them on the screen. And that was a big conversation.
But the funny part about that is, like if I was talking to a web developer, it would be like SVGs. Oh yeah, sure. No problem.
Right.
And then you think about it on mobile and you're like, oh no, this is a huge problem. Like it's not something that we don't always have nice things on mobile, so like, having an easy plugin to bring in to have those nice things is, I think, pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Let's go forward here a little bit. Here we go. So, like what I thought we would look at here today is something that I've had that's like a common request from clients over the years is to do like these Apple Watch fitness circle rings. I don't know about you, Rodney, man, but I get asked to build this like same control probably like twice or three times a year. people love it for like just, just this like nested rings idea.
Yep.
People always want something like that.
Yeah, they do.
Uh, and it's cool. Like I get it. What I thought we would do today is kind of look at like, how do we build, we're going to build a couple of different like little UI controls. We'll start simple and just do like a linear gauge type of idea. But then how do we do something a little bit more advanced like this, where you can see we've got, obviously it's rounded out here. We've got like rounded ends. There's sort of a background color. There's maybe like a little bit of a shadow out here. How do we do all this work that, like, to me, before Skia, this would be super daunting.
Look, I would just tell the designer, not gonna do it.
Not happening.
Not
Yeah.
gonna happen. Sorry, yeah, not gonna do it.
But like, I will look at the code. It's like, once we take a look at it, it's, I think, surprisingly easy. What it actually comes out to be.
So Mike, you keep using words like easy and simple, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to remind you again, I am not an artiste. Like simple and easy when it comes to these things. Yeah, right. Yeah, Dan said that he's not going to do it either. That's the whole, like, you keep saying it's simple, and like, I need you to show me how simple it is, because if you're going to show me it's so simple that I could have been doing it years ago, I may feel better about this conversation.
I hope you feel like it's at least a little bit less daunting, because again, man, I was in your same shoes. I couldn't, it was like paralyzing having to think about drawing this stuff.
Yes.
And now it's more like a fun challenge. Like it's something where, it's way different conceptually from writing line of business applications. So what I do day in and day out is build, software for companies. And so that's a lot of like, you build a repository pattern, and then you build a view model, and you build a thing that publishes data and it connects it all up. And it's fun and it's challenging in its own right. And I really like doing all that work. Don't get me wrong.
But
it's not like, is creative, right? You get this application and it might look, it might look nice and you feel good about the way that it's built, but software is one of these things where you don't get like this, that feels good, that looks good, type of thing. Like for example, like as a hobby, I do a lot of woodworking, and like with woodworking, you're like, it's bad. And then you start assembling it and you're like, oh, it's better. This looks good. Those joints fit together. Oh, okay. I could see what I made. Like this feels good,
Right.
And I feel like this kind of development kind of falls into that place where you're going to write a lot of garbage code and be like, it's bad. But then you'll hit run and you'll see it animate, or you'll see it draw the thing that you want. And you're like, oh, it's good. We're good. So
it's fantastic. Yeah.
So to start off, all you need to do, so this is a little bit outdated slide, but all you need to do is just pull in some NuGet packages for your application. So here you just go grab like Skia Sharp. You can go grab the views for forms, or if you're doing a MAUI application, like nowadays, you just go for Skia Sharp views MAUI and just pull that into your application there. And that kind of gets you everything that you need to get up and running with sort of doing, the Skia Sharp UI development in your mobile application.
Okay.
What that's really going to give you then is this thing called a canvas view. That's going to be where we do like most of our work in Skia. The canvas view kind of works the way you might think a canvas would work. I know it maybe sounds silly or whatever, but like the idea here is it's really just like a place to draw on. It's going to give us some information about like the size of the canvas, like how big it is. We might get some information about the host that holds onto the canvas, like how are pixels represented, things like that. But realistically, it's just a place for us to go paint. And again, this was one of those things that, as silly as it sounds, like this idea of a canvas to me was always like obscure and kind of scary. And then I just realized like, no, it's just like if you're old like me, it's like a light bright. Like, how do I turn on the little pixels in the area of the light bright here, right? Like, what do I do? Or if you think of it from like your Bob Ross type perspective, like it's your canvas. We're going to put some titanium white on there, and then we're going to, go on and start drawing trees and stuff like that. But like, it's just like the host for where we're going to draw. So that's what we're going to
do this rest of this thing like Bob Ross. I would not be.
I unfortunately, I am not that chill.
Neither am I, but I think it'd be fantastic.
I wish I
We'll
was, but
add the screen.
we'll draw some happy little gauges maybe today.
There you go. There you go.
But this is really what we get, and this is, this is kind of the basis for what we're going to do all of our work with here in Skia. If we look at it here, then, so this is kind of like the base code. If we wanted to build like a progress view, there's really just like a couple of core things that we need to know about. So first up here is we've got just our, like I said, we've got our canvas view, and that's going to be our sort of base view that we work with there.
Okay.
And then with this canvas view, there's really two pieces of interaction. The first one is invalidate surface. And so invalidate surface is really just there to tell us to redraw. So if you have like an animation or something like that, and your animation runs at 60 frames per second, you're going to call invalidate surface every about 17 milliseconds, just to tell it to repaint the canvas. When invalidate surface gets called, then we're going to have our method out here, which is on paint surface. And that'll just give us some information about the actual canvas that we're working on. And then that surface information, which will have, again, like information about potentially like the type of display that we're working with, or the type of, or how the how the canvas was created. So not too much to worry about with that for today. I'm going to kind of skip over it a little bit. That's maybe a little bit more advanced and something we don't care about.
Okay.
At least for today's discussion. The thing that we're really interested in here, though, is just getting to that canvas. That canvas is the key thing. That's where we're going to go do our painting. So
right, because the canvas is the surface area where you can actually put elements.
Yeah, exactly. It's again, just think of it like if you were painting, it is your canvas, and that's what we're going to draw upon. So pretty straightforward, pretty easy from that perspective. Right. So then how do we draw on the canvas? Well, we're going to do that using paint. So SK paint, right? Everything's going to be SK something or other. But like, it's just, again, it's conceptually, if you think about it, how you would paint on a canvas. You'll choose what kind of brush that you have. Maybe you're going to fill the UI with some amount of, color. Maybe you're going to draw a path on the UI, and you want to not fill in the path, but you just want to draw on the path. So you could say like, here's my path, and I want to draw this color along that path, and I want it to have a certain thickness to it or width to it, which would be referred to the stroke. Do I want that stroke to be totally filled in or dashed? All that kind of cool stuff. But again, like that is the sort of that paint object there is sort of the core idea. So it's really just saying, take a certain set of colors and then build I'm going to call it like a virtual brush in a way. Like, how do we want to paint on the screen? Is it going to fill with color, like I said? Are we going to draw along a path and apply it to our canvas? Along with that, then, because it's not reality, it's digital, right? We have all kinds of cool things. We don't have to be beholden to paint brushes and feathering styles and all that other kind of cool stuff. We could also apply things like shaders and filters to our paint as well. So that would allow us to do things like desaturate color, or manipulate the way colors are shown, or apply a filter that will provide blurring or a shadow type application to when we draw. So all these kind of like advanced features that we could just sort of apply to our virtual paint to get it to draw out there. And then the paint itself, like I said, it comes in a lot of different ways. We could paint things like fonts, different kinds of lines, arcs, all that kind of good stuff. So like circles, rounded circles, whatever you need. So it's kind of like if you've ever used a tool like Photoshop in a way, or some kind of like drawing type of application in the past, a lot of those types of things that you would see, like draw a line from here to here, make a path and fill in the path, all that kind of good stuff. So that's kind of our paint. And then like I was saying, so our paint is going to look something like this then from a code perspective. So
Okay.
inside of our application, when we do this, we're just going to make a new paint object. And then we tell the paint object how we want it to paint. So we would say like, do a style of stroke, which means if I draw like a path, just draw a line on that path essentially. And then the stroke width would tell it, it should be 32 points wide.
Right.
And then stroke cap at the end, we want it to be rounded off. So don't square it, but round off the edges.
Right.
And then anti-aliasing. This is a term if you play like games and things like that before. If you've got like rounded edges, you either can have them be kind of jaggedy, where it just draws the actual every single pixel, every point along the way, or you could apply anti-aliasing, which will kind of smooth out those pixels. It'll draw some sort of intermediary pixels in between to give things just kind of a more smooth appearance out there. But that's it. So that's like kind of the painting style there. So Rodney, how are you feeling so far? Okay. Is it scary?
Yeah. So let's dig into this. So so basically what you're telling me is like we've got some specific concerns, right? I've got a canvas and then I can just put some paint on a canvas, and just like any other kind of paint, like if I was to paint a room that I'm in, right? Like the paint on the wall behind me, I have to give it a color. I have to give it some metadata so that it understands how it should do its job.
Correct.
And then I basically just take the paint and put it on the canvas, right?
More or less.
Okay.
Yeah. So
so far, so
that's
good.
our next thing. Canvas operations, right? So how do we actually take that paint and apply it? Perfect.
Right. Perfect.
So yeah, like, do we want to do shapes? Are we drawing paths? We could also do things like draw bitmaps. So if you want to read in like a bitmap file or like a PNG or a JPEG image, we could read that image in and apply it to our canvas as well. We could also do things like transform the canvas. So we can rotate it. Okay. We can skew it. We can enlarge it. We could draw things to it and save it and then restore it back to where it was before. But it's all like, how do we take our paint and put it on the UI essentially? Right. So those operations then look a little something like this. So at the beginning of our canvas, a lot of times, or at the beginning of our drawing operation, what we do a lot of times is call clear. So if we've previously drawn on the canvas, we just want to go through there and clear off anything that we've previously drawn. So just kind of give us a blank slate. There also can be cases where there's times where you want to progressively draw something where we might not call clear. But a lot of times when we start redrawing for our UI, we'll call clear just to kind of make sure we don't have any old artifacts or anything out there.
That makes sense, right? Because like in like the MVU pattern, right? Like when the model updates and then the view has to update as a result of the model updating, right? Like you wouldn't want to necessarily start where you left off. You'd want to repaint everything.
Correct.
Okay. That makes sense.
Correct. Exactly right.
Yeah. I'm with it so far. Okay.
So, if we wanted to do something like draw an oval then with our canvas, all we would do is we would give it a rectangle, like in this case, that's just going to say, here's your X position, your Y position, and then you're this wide and this tall. That's it. And then we give it our paint object, and the paint object will tell it how you fill in that rectangle. Is it going to be totally filled in? Is it going to be just around the outside borders? Things like that.
Okay.
Our canvas, like I mentioned, we could do operations to our canvas, so we can skew it. So if we want to kind of like pull it on an edge, we could do things like that. Down here, we could rotate our canvas. So we might do something where, say we wanted to draw like a clock or something like that. Instead of having to figure out which degree that we need to draw all of our hands for our clock, or if we're drawing like the time around the outside of the clock, what we could do is draw that time in the same spot every time, but just rotate our canvas around it, right? So instead of me having to figure out how do I skew and turn this like number a little bit and get it to fit like at 45 degrees or something,
right?
I could just move my canvas and just keep on drawing that time in the same spot and just rotate my canvas around it.
Interesting.
So it's kind of that kind of stuff ends up to me being really fun and interesting, because that is like, again, when I think Bob Ross, the canvas is on an easel. It's not going anywhere. He's rotating his body to do stuff.
Yeah.
Where a lot of times when I'm writing like Skia code, I think like I'm in a fixed position. How can I move my canvas around me to do work with it, kind of idea.
Interesting.
So Um, so, using all those concepts, then what we can do is we could build MAUI controls on top of that. So, like I mentioned, we're going to look at a few different options here. But you would build, kind of a MAUI control like you would any other custom MAUI control from here on out, right? So,
Okay.
in this case, we're going to build something. We're going to actually look at two controls. We'll look at a linear progress and a circular progress view.
Okay.
Um, but essentially, all you would do is you would cook up a bunch of bindable properties.
Hmm.
Give me something that tells me the progress color. Give me something that tells me like the degrees for
Hmm.
where the end of my circle should be, the thickness of the line, all that kind of good stuff.
Right.
And then what we can do then is translate that into our drawing operations. So
Okay.
now's a pretty good time. I can switch over and we could start taking a look here at doing some drawing itself then. So like, how do we actually take what was represented there for that control and draw it on a screen, right?
Yep.
So let's come into here and I've got the first one we'll look at here is a simplified one. And let me see if I've got this running here. I'm going to run this really quick um, while we're showing this off. But we're going to look at a control. It's just a linear progress control. So all it is just like a left to right style UI control out here just to show on the screen. Like I mentioned, we've got a bunch of just properties like we would for any other kind of MAUI UI control.
Hmm.
This would be like our starting point,
Right.
our ending point,
Yep.
colors, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
And then just like a little bit of this is more or less just kind of some setup code here. I'm just listening for the handler to be changed and just using that to again call and validate surface, which will just tell me to come into my paint surface down here.
Got it.
I'm also grabbing this out here. This is handy, and I'll show how this gets used in a moment. But the Skia canvas itself, by default, is going to be drawing using real physical pixels. So that's that concept that if our application is, or if excuse me, if our device has like a UI that's like a high pixel density UI, there might be this concept where there's like 3 or more pixels per like logical pixel. So when I think of when we think about pixels as like an end user, it's just one little point on the screen, but in
Hmm.
reality, it might be made up of 3 or more individual dots on the screen that are actually being drawn out there. So what
Gotcha.
we're going to do is we're just going to use this density out here to kind of scale up some of our values that we've received earlier and just make sure that they're drawn at the right size for that device. All right, so let me see here for some reason. See if I get my application up and running. There we go.
Seems
So
good.
here's what we're going to make. This is our little linear gauge, right? So nothing too crazy. I've got little animations and stuff like that in here, but
Okay.
it's just drawing, I've got 3 different linear gauges that we're going to show.
Okay.
So how do we do that? All right. So when we come into our paint surface here, let me just kind of get that out of the way. We come into our paint surface here. Like I was saying, what the thing that we're really interested in is our canvas. So that's going to be passed into here from our handler args. So we're going to have E, and then we're just going to come out and grab the canvas from within there. Like I mentioned, almost every time what we're going to do is clear the canvas. If I didn't do that every time I repainted, like with one of these animations, it would just have whatever was painted on there previously and attempt to paint over it. So it's probably not what I would want in those scenarios. And then all I need to do in addition here is I'm going to set up basically how I'm going to paint and where I'm going to paint. So these 2 objects here are paint, like we talked about before. This is going to be, let's kind of scoot this to kind of make this a little bit easier to read maybe. Our paint here is just going to be our definition of how we want to actually do some amount of drawing. So again, in this case, I'm going to say that I want to draw anti-aliased. So with anti-aliasing enabled so that we get those kind of smooth nice rounded edges here.
Mhm.
I want the edges to be rounded. So when I draw, I want this to be rounded. I'm going to use a stroke style, which basically means draw on the line. So whatever path I give you, draw above and below it. The width here, that's going to be how large that stroke width should be. Here we're actually going to use that scale. So I have this concept of a progress thickness, which is supplied from the user interface. And then basically what I need to do is I just need to multiply that by the density of the screen to get what we might think of as like logical pixels for our user. So if we didn't do this, multiplication here, essentially what would end up happening is on different display density screens, this width would end up looking inconsistent.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so that is like one little caveat. It's something there's other ways you can manage this. There's ways we could standardize that kind of stuff, and I could have put it into like the property setter and things like that. But again, for today, I want to call that out and show it just in case somebody sees that and they're like, "What's going on there?" So like, try to keep that. I think it's kind of just a good thing to keep in mind if you're going to use Skia here. And then our color. So again, and there's lots of nice like built-in extension methods. So in this case, I just have it's a MAUI color out here, this progress color, and I've got extension methods to convert it into the equivalent Skia color as well. So that's our painting. That's all we need to say how we want to paint on the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
The next thing that we need to do is define where to paint. So here, what I'm going to do is create a path. Again, there's multiple ways you could do this. This is just one of the ways we can achieve what we want here. But our path basically is going to need a start and an end point to draw. So what we'll do is I've got just this little simple kind of, see if I can just wrap this a little bit so we could read it maybe on one screen. It's pretty simplistic. Once we break it down here, a little bit of code, but essentially what we're saying is I'm going to take the width of my canvas here. I've got my info object. This is again, something that comes in with our event args up here. I could say, give me the width. And then I'm going to take my starting point and divide it by 100. So essentially like, give me the starting point here out of 100. So assuming that the starting point and the ending point in total are out of 100, right? So you could go from 0 to 100 with this kind of a linear gauge, essentially. Outside of that, then, what we need to do is we will need to make some other slight adjustments here. The thing is that we've got our thickness here, which is used for our stroke width, which means that we will kind of draw a little bit further out than the end of our line.
Which makes sense. So
just need to adjust it a little bit here and there to like accommodate for that. And then we just clamp those values, between like a min and a max out here. So we don't want those to basically go beyond a certain threshold. So just use a clamping just to say that you can't go way far past the end or below the minimum.
See, now you're using math. We were talking about drawing and paint and all this stuff. And then I see this clamp method and I'm like, wait, that's math, sir.
Clamp's easy. Clamp just says you can only go between a minimum and a maximum, right?
That's
just
fair.
Keep this number between a min and a max. It's easy once you see it. So
it's fair. It's fair.
It's not too bad.
No.
We're always going to draw this in the like dead center vertically. So again, just doing a little bit of math here just to find out where my center point is. And then what I do is I move my path to my start point in the center. So it's saying basically go to, in this case, go to this X and this Y right here, or this X and this Y right here, or right here. And then line 2, which just means take from your starting point, draw a line to the end. So again, go from where you started to the end. That's our path. And then just draw that path. So that's it. And that gives us everything we need at this point in time to draw that UI.
Got it.
And that would be everything you would need to statically draw this UI on the screen. So, if you break it down, it's not too bad. Like it's, hey, you clear your canvas here.
Yep.
You set up your paintbrush here.
Yep.
You set up where you want to draw here. And then you just tell it to go draw. and
Okay.
that's it.
And
Um,
is that standard? Is that generally how that's gonna work? Like, is it okay? I have a canvas, I have some paint, and then some path. Like, is the path necessarily?
Depends on what we're looking to
That's
do.
what I figured. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So like again, we have lots of options here. So like I could, if I wanted to, I could say canvas, draw. And if we look at sort of our draw options out
Got
here,
it.
I could say
Yep.
draw just 1 point, draw multiple points, draw different types of rectangles, like a regular rectangle or a
Right.
rounded rectangle,
Right. Okay.
text, all kinds of different options, even more up here.
Okay.
Arcs, if you want to draw like a circle or a partial, part of the outside of a circle, bitmaps, full circles, all that kind of stuff. Like you've got just tons of different options out here for how you actually want to draw on the screen.
Gotcha.
But a path is pretty helpful. Again, we're just drawing a straight
Straight
line.
line. Yep.
Pretty easy way to draw a line out there without too much fuss.
Good deal.
Um, the cool part about this then, is if we want to use this in a UI, um, from a UI perspective, it's just going to look like any other kind of
Same.
MAUI control. So it's
It's literally
linear
it's the same.
progress. And this is all that I see from an end user perspective, right?
Nice.
So pretty easy. Also, what's pretty cool about this is that if you remember basically with our control here, I can call this invalidate surface. And every time I call that, it will tell the UI to redraw. And
Okay.
if you were to look at how I've got my bindable properties up here, essentially anytime one of these properties gets set, and this is maybe again, there's probably a way we could do some batching or make this more performant, but anytime one of these properties gets set, I tell it to just redraw itself.
Mm,
And this is kind of a cool hack because what this means then is without any other additional knowledge, like, do I need to make it like, what if I wanted to animate these like I've got here? Like when I tap the screen, you'll see that these kind of animate from start to end. But like now we're talking about animation and that's a nightmare. And like, I don't, like I'm not making a game engine. That's way too much.
way too much.
But if we just tell it to redraw when these properties get set, we can use things that come out of the box with MAUI. So I could say like on this page, just go generate some random values here. I can assign those random values here. And then what I can do is I could tell it to animate these just using the out of the box animation from MAUI, right? So that's just a
Mm,
regular .NET or, regular .NET MAUI animation. So it's just this
right.
thing. I'm going to call the animate method on it.
Mhm,
That's something that like, we just have out of the box.
right.
Give that animation a name, tell it what I want to do,
Mhm,
which property I want it to update, and then essentially just give it some information about how I want it to animate out here. So we've got like the rate of animation, how quick I want that to draw, how long I want it to run. And I can also do things that are like a little bit more potentially advanced, like apply easing to the animation. So, I don't want it to just animate in like a linear fashion where there's no like, it doesn't have any like additional motion to it. Like it doesn't start slow and go fast, then go slow. I can use those easings to control something like that. So cubic in and out, I think is, yeah, it'll take the animation and apply it faster at the beginning and then slow down at the end. Or I could tell it to spring out. And you'll notice here, like we kind of get like a little jiggle at the end where it kind of overshoots the animation. It comes back. Um, all of this is able to be done then without me even having to do anything for that control. It's just the control just knows how to paint this line and fill it with color. And I could use all these other cool things that come out of the box with MAUI or whatever, like our UI platform is. Everything's got like a way to apply animations to it or to build something like this. And I just update those properties to get this all to animate. So
nice.
pretty easy from that perspective, I think, or at least we could cheat and appear that we're smarter than we are using using stuff that was built by somebody who who has a good feel for doing that animation and stuff like
Right.
that.
Right.
So that's kind of like an easy control. This is our easy mode one here. But like I said, we want to draw something a little bit more advanced. We want to draw that radial type of progress view. So what does it take to draw something like this, where you could see we've got, again, kind of those rounded ends. We've got shadows being drawn underneath. We've got a darker color underneath our circles and things like that. Um, it's kind of the same like we've just seen, but just with more, a little bit more to it. So the same, but more, right? So, um, again, just like we saw before, we've got all of our different properties that we'll set up here. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but same kind of idea, like where's our starting point? Where's our end point? All that kind of good stuff out there. Um, things to listen for our handler changing again, just to tell it to kind of kick off everything. But then, we get into the actual drawing, and it's just going to be a little bit different because what we're trying to achieve is different. So we start with the same kind of idea. We're going to go and grab our canvas. I'll go and grab the size of our canvas essentially. So just go tell me how big this thing is here. I'm going to clear out the canvas. So if there was any drawing that happened out there previously, just clear that out. And then I set up my paint. So this far out, basically as we were before.
Okay. Yep.
I'm going to skip over this jagged one here for a moment. We're going to come back to that in just a moment here. But the idea here is kind of the same thing that we had before when we were drawing our line. So create a new path, kind of get an idea for like, where's the left-hand side, the top, the right, and the bottom. So just kind of figure out like where in space are all these things on my canvas. And then what I could do is I could tell it to start drawing different components. So in this case here, I've got an arc that I'm going to draw. The arc here is actually going to be this underlying color. So if you notice, for each one of these rings, there's sort of a highlight color and then a more muted color below it. All that is just drawing an arc there. So it's using my path to draw an arc, to tell it that, or to add an arc, excuse me, to my path. I'm going to actually manipulate the color of my paint for a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our progress color. I'm going to tone down the luminosity. So that's basically saying like, and again, I'm not an expert on this stuff, so if my understanding here is a little bit wrong, but it's basically like toning down the color a little bit or toning it up. So we're just going to, make it a darker color, but the same base color, but just darker essentially.
Is it similar to like opacity in Xamarin Forms?
So opacity would be controlling how see-through it is.
Right.
This is more like take that same color, but give me either a darker version of it or a lighter version of it. So
got it. Okay.
More like there's like lumens would be, again, I'm totally probably wrong about this, but like lumens would be like the amount of like light coming off of something. So I don't know if it's like subtracting light from it or adding light to it. It's that kind of idea.
Okay. That's intense.
But just think of it like the core idea is I just want to make, this teal-y color more, I don't know, bluey green as opposed to being like a brighter green, right? Or brighter blue. And then I just tell it to draw that path. So just go draw that path out there. And at that point in time, it's going to draw that underlying darker ring.
Okay. I see. So you're drawing the whole ring first.
Correct. And this is, again, when you think about it like a canvas, if you go back to like watching all those Bob Ross videos and stuff like there, the last thing that he does is draw the trees a lot of times, right? The first thing that he starts off with is almost always a coat of titanium white. And then on top of that, he's going through and he's drawing the sky. And then he's drawing everything sort of on top of it. So it'll be like the sky and then clouds and then mountains and then grass and water and things like that.
Yep.
We need to think about drawing on our canvas in a very similar fashion. So we're going to draw the base of it first. And so
it's almost like layering. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Totally right. Yep.
Cool.
So we would do that same thing here. We're drawing our base layer first. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to reset our path. We're going to take any arcs or any other lines or anything else that we've put in there and just kind of reset it back to empty. And then we're going to draw a new arc out here. So again, it's going to be that same that same rectangle that we want to draw in. But if you notice when we drew this before, we went from 0 degrees to 360 degrees.
Right.
And the only difference now is we're going to go from our starting degree to our ending degree out here.
And that's what gives us that dual effect, right? Where we have We have the background, which is the full 360 degrees, which is the first layer, and then we have the foreground or the layer above it. Let's call it that because I don't want to call it foreground. That's too that is going to use the same arc, the same rotation. It's just going to start and stop at different points.
Exactly right. Yep.
Perfect. Cool.
Exactly right. We're going to update our paint. So we're going to use that same paint object. That's okay. We're just going to change the color on it for a moment. And then we're going to do two things that I will say are a little bit more advanced, but cool. And not too crazy once you learn what they're doing. So the first one is applying a filter. So this is where I was saying, like, we can't do this exactly if we had a paint brush, but what I can do to my paint is I could tell it when you draw this, apply a blur to it. And this is something that's really helpful when you're drawing shadows, because the next thing that we want to draw is our shadow layer for this control. So I'm going to say, take that same paint, the same information that we applied up here, that same stroke style and everything like that.
Right.
But now change my paint color to black, and let's update it so that when we draw this, we apply a blur effect to that drawing. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use a blend mode. So a blend mode uses this thing. They're called Porter-Duff blend modes. Basically says, if you see, if you look at the canvas as is, and if you see that somebody's already painted there, what do? Do you paint on top of it? Do you paint around it? Can you only paint where it's been painted before, or can you only paint where you haven't painted before? That kind of thing.
Got it. So the blend is kind of getting into how we layer things onto the canvas.
Correct. Yeah. And so in this case, what I'm going to use is this blend mode called Source A Top. And what that'll do is it's going to say it can only paint where paint has previously been. And so what's neat about this is I want to draw the shadow effect. And I know it's maybe not the easiest thing to see on the stream here, but at the end of this line, there's this little shadow effect on both sides. And I don't want it to bleed out either way, right? So I don't want it to draw out here or out here. I really just want it to draw kind of like where I've already drawn that, that arc before. And so A Top will draw that blend and draw it all the way underneath here, but it'll keep it to just where this darker color has been previously. All right, so I'll draw my path there, draw that on the screen. And then what I do is I just kind of adjust my paintbrush again. So I say this time, no blurring. I just want to do a regular draw. I'm going to do a source over, which means just paint over whatever's out there. I'm going to take my new paintbrush and just paint on the UI wherever I can out there. I'll adjust my color. So give me whatever my true color is. This would be that bright color. And then I paint one more time. So we had kind of 3 layers of painting here, right? We had our first bottom layer, then we drew our shadow layer, and then on top of that, we drew our final layer. And that's what gets us to that arc out there.
Got it. So
it's not like, again, if you kind of break it into steps, it's not too bad. There is a lot to learn here. There are certainly concepts like this blend mode here. That was something that took me for a while to get my head around, to be honest. There's some documentation that I'll point everybody to that's got some really good information on it out there. But it's just kind of getting that feel for like, oh, right. So like I need to draw, like you said, like it's drawing in layers. Like what do I think my lowest layer is? Then how do I draw on top of that layer? And how do I draw on top of that layer? It's kind of just figuring out, how we need to blend those things together and put it on the screen. But it's not too difficult. Like, again, in some libraries, if we needed to draw an arc, you have to do like, you have to use radians, and you've got it. Then I'm like sitting there and you're multiplying by pi and doing all this kind of good stuff to go from radians to degrees or degrees to radians. Here, it's just like very simple, right? It's just, here's our, start and end degree, and just draw me an arc in some square. So a lot of these things that like conceptually might have been kind of difficult, creating a blur, that I don't know how you do that. That seems like a nightmare to me. All I do is I apply a filter and it blurs my UI out there for me. Right.
Nice. Yeah.
So kind of a neat thing. So how are we feeling so far, Rodney?
Okay, so like so far, I don't feel like you've broken my brain just yet. I mean, like, because it all makes sense, right? Like
Sure.
you, and I've built Xamarin UIs before, right? Like I built web form UIs. Just like I get the concept of what you're talking about, but what you're talking about is really more of a putting layers of stuff on a page to get a desired result versus let me grab this control and tweak it slightly based upon things. So you're actually constructing an entire UI layer and piece at a time. And it to your point, it takes a little bit of breakdown, just like you would with any business user story, right? Yeah, I
Right.
hear the ask, but there's really three things that you want to do in this user story in order to be able to get to where we want to go. So it seems like if I can look at the image and I can conceptualize those layers and I understand the API surface, I should be better off than I was when we started this conversation. So I'm,
Yeah.
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. So you feel so it's you kind of put that in a good way. Like if you really just break it down, like again, it's like if you look at it as one thing put together. Like I would always talk about this with my kids when they were little. We'd have Legos that we would buy and you would see the end product and it's like, oh, that's too complicated. I don't know how to deal with this.
Right.
But if you look at it from piece to piece, you're like, oh, I
Mhm.
just build this little module and then
Right.
it attaches to that one and it
Right.
attaches to that one. And eventually it's this whole big thing. And all
Right.
those little steps along the way weren't themselves too difficult. But if you look at it on the holistic, it's like it's way too much, right?
Yeah, Mike, I
That
got a question from the audience that I wanna
you got it.
bring up. So Hector is asking, he says that he's seen cool animations in like React Native Skia. And he's wondering, like, can you do the same thing in .NET MAUI? And I'm assuming you should be able to because Skia is Skia, right?
Skia. Yep. So we have access. So Skia has shaders that we could use to apply to our drawing operations. And it uses a skater, a shader language. It's SKSL. All of that is available to us out here in .NET MAUI as well. So
Awesome.
any kind of cool things that people are doing out there for drawing, animations, stuff like that. It's just a matter of building it and applying it. Um, and I know from a question perspective, I think I saw one scroll through from Dan earlier saying like, hey, what would it take to do this drawing on like from Maui to Uno, for example, right?
Yeah.
Um, this drawing code stays essentially the same. That's the cool part.
Right.
So I might have a different container. This SK canvas view might be different on Uno as opposed to, Avalonia as opposed to Maui as opposed to whatever. But what I could do is pretty easily is I could abstract out this painting code because this is pretty generic. This is all just
Mhm.
Skia-ish code.
Right.
Maybe I can make it so that I would pass in a certain amount of parameters or something. Like I would pass in the color and do things like that. But outside of that, all of these paint operations, the actual work that I need to go do the drawing would be the same. So porting over to a new platform has a little bit of like sort of upfront cost just to get the new platform kind of up and running. But the actual paint operations and bringing it to a new platform is a lot easier because all you need to do is just port your paint operations from one platform to another, which I think is kind of awesome.
You would almost think that because it's all C sharp, it should just work, right?
Yeah,
Like, so I think that that would be an interesting concept of like what does it look like taking something that works on Maui and getting it working in like an Uno or an Avalonia and then vice versa. And is it
something
possible to build a consistent set of controls across all three that could just be reused?
I think so, and it's something that I'm definitely looking into for our Aurora controls because
Nice.
why not, right?
Why not?
I've already done the work to make a draw on Maui. Why not just bring it over to those other platforms?
So Dan is assuming that this is going to be done by the end of the day, right?
I mean, easily tomorrow morning, but probably not this afternoon. But
That's fair.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean he's got to at least eat lunch, right?
but that's the thing. It's not as if like again, like in the past, if I were to have written all this UI code in sort of like native iOS drawing language, I couldn't bring it straight over to a new platform without having to
Mm-mm.
reinvent how it's all drawn. here with Skia Sharp, I've already figured out how to draw and get my control built. It's just a matter of figuring out like what's my container on that platform and how do I get to the point where I could draw on my canvas. But the
So
canvas operations are all the same.
is that kind of the surface stuff that you glossed over earlier, where the canvas is the same, but the surface that we put the canvas on might be different?
Yeah, we might have some, right. We might have some different information about like how the canvas was constructed,
Right.
things
Okay.
like that. Our sizing might be different. We
Okay.
might have scales that we have to deal with on certain platforms or not.
Okay.
But realistically, once we get past that, if I were to take this code from like here on down, the actual work that we're doing with painting and interoperating with the canvas, this is all portable,
Okay.
which is pretty cool. Right. So, again, these properties, I guess these come from MAUI, but it doesn't matter. I would just need something. I would just need a method that says paint circular progress, and I would pass these in as parameters, something like
Okay.
that. Very easy to port.
Cool.
And then again, this is something just kind of silly here, but like it's also very easy to extend. So if you want to like play around with these controls, I'm going to apply this thing called discrete, which is going to give us like a jitter effect. It's really unnerving, but I think it's really cool to see it in action.
Oh, gosh.
Like once you have these controls, and I'm on a Mac, if we were on Windows, I would have some better like hot reload support. But like what we could do is we could start to like play around with these components. So let's make I call this like my 1990s Nickelodeon style
Oh man.
drawing.
Yeah. That stuff.
It's got that like that like that 90s cartoon style where things didn't really ever stay in like Dr. Katz or Beavis and Butthead or things like
Yep.
that where the animation always was a little jittery.
Yep. I
We
know
can do
exactly
something
what
like
you're
that
talking
here. And again, it's like super easy. Like all I did was change like a line of code.
about.
And now you
Oh.
can see I get this nightmare factory. Like I think it's kind of cool though. Like it's kind of neat. It'll maybe make you feel like sick to your stomach a little bit, but like it's a kind of a neat effect that came at basically no cost to me, right? It
Right.
was a one line of code change,
Right.
which I think is pretty cool. So
That is pretty interesting.
but yeah, that's the gist of drawing out here. A few things like a sort of in addition that I just wanted to point out here. Lots of plugins like SVG drawing. If you need to do text rendering, Lottie animations, all that kind of stuff. Tons of additional libraries that we could use and just extend right in our code out there. And if you're really looking to like dive deep into this, so this hasn't been ported for MAUI yet, but all the ideas and concepts here are the exact same. There's a book that was put together a while back called Skia Sharp Graphics in Xamarin Forms. It is like anywhere that you go on the internet. I don't care if you just want to learn how Skia works outside of like C Sharp. It seems like it's the most comprehensive guide to do anything and everything you would need with Skia and Draw. So really good information about like, deep diving into how do the pathing operators work. How do we do like UI transforms? How do we operate with different types of components? Like how do we import images? How do we export images? Things like that, which are all pretty awesome. This is kind of the best. Again, it's funny. Like if you look for a book on Skia, or if you look to like learn Skia, sometimes it's very archaic. Like there's not a lot of good documentation.
Yeah.
But like most things.net, you could find the pretty good documentation for it out here online, which kind of gives you like a good overall overview, which I think is pretty handy.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah, and that's actually been the hurdle for me is, yeah, I can look at the documentation, like, I can understand what's going on. I can read it till I'm blue in the face, but then you're like, yeah, Rodney, go draw this thing on this page, and I'm like, like you said, it's that paralysis where it's like
Yeah.
it's just so much information and it's so overwhelming and it's so far out my comfort zone that I just don't know where to begin.
Totally. And there's tons of great like sample code in here. Again, it's all written for forms, but everything it's all translated right over to anything that you would do in Skia, right? So whether you're going to do it in forms, Avalonia, Uno, anything like that,
Right.
Tons of great examples out there. So it's like just a tremendous help to get you up and running.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
The samples that I had out here today, I've got just a quick link if you want to go grab that code. That's that code that we saw out here for our presentation.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up now.
Cool.
I'm gonna download your stuff and I'm gonna tweak it and
Please do.
and figure out how. Oh man, this is fantastic.
But I figured, yeah. Outside of that, just open it up. I don't know if there's any other questions that came through or anything. I got to give a shout out to Bob Ross. God, man, too much time spent watching those videos.
Oh man, it was great. Like I would always watch Bob Ross. I'm like, I could do this, and then it's like, no, I can't. Like, I can't do this. All right, we got a couple of things coming in from the audience. So first off, Hector says, very good demos. Javier Suarez created a very interesting project. Oh, Figma. Yeah. So it's funny that you bring this up. So we talked about designers earlier, and I'm not going to beat up on designers, but I feel like designers change tools like every other week. And,
Totally.
you know, I just found out about Figma like a month or two ago.
Sure.
Right. Like,
sure.
And then I hear all these people talk about and we've always talked about in Xamarin, or really in the .NET space, of being able to take a pixel perfect UI created by a designer and get actual XAML out of it. Like that was actually the sell of XAML, was that, designers can go and make their designs using, and they don't have to know how to code. Right. So something like this type of tool is, in my opinion, primo. And if it already generates Skia code, that's just even better.
I mean, that's the cool thing. Cause like, again, that drawing operation is generic. It's all that code that I wrote to do the pathing and stuff like that. It just makes the assumption that I have a canvas and I want to do something with it.
Right.
If you've got a way to take Figma, which I assume underneath the sheets is probably like an XML document or a Java, like a JSON document or something like that. If you could parse what it has there, convert it into Skia operations, you're ready to rip.
Yep. Yeah. Figma is one of those tools that I don't know what it does underneath the hood, but it has some proprietary jazzmatazz that that makes
all the designers we work with use it nowadays. And again,
right, that's what I was like, man, like, and it's funny because, like, I remember some years Sketch was like the thing,
was the one.
Like,
yep.
And then something else came, like Figma's like the new thing, and I guess Dan is telling us that Uno platform has a Figma to XAML tool too. So that's again, awesome. These are interesting times that we work in, where we are actually getting to this pay dirt of, hey, we've got some design that the designer has given us, and now we can construct usable code from that output. So that's a great place, because that reduces the amount of Skia this guy's got to.
Sure. But that's the thing. Yeah. If someone were to make tools to go around it, again, awesome library. It has all that platform support. Yeah. It's just a matter of translating, right?
Right. It's about understanding the API surface, knowing what you're trying to do. And I think that's was the biggest barrier to entry, right? Like, okay, how do I change this, like, okay, so let's just look at like a sine wave, right? Like where it goes up and I got to go the other way and then comes back down, right? Like, how do I do something like that? Well, obviously I have to provide it an arc. I got to draw some things, but like now understanding the API surface is honestly as simple as, okay, I've got a paint, and then I've got some, and I'm going to use path in the generic term, a path that this paint has to go on, whether it be a straight line, whether it be a straight line and then some circles, whether or not it be, some hexagon, whatever it is,
doesn't matter.
That's irrelevant. All I have to do is give it a color, give the color some understanding around how it needs to interact with the canvas, and then I tell it to go do it.
Yep.
And I think that's the part that was hard for me, is like, how do you even get to that point? How do I get to the point where I can draw a circle on a screen? Right? Because like, yeah, it's easy, right? It's supposed to be simple, but I don't do math I don't do math like I did back in college. Like I don't remember sine, cosine, tangent. And I don't want to have to. And I honestly don't want to have to do that just to render a beautiful UI. I don't want to have to go through all of that mental gymnastics.
So the only thing I would say though, I had that same apprehension, but it's fun. It ends up being like a fun challenge, because again, like that's stuff that I did at this point in time 20 years ago in college and whatever, and it's like right, and I just it's all in here deep embedded somewhere, but I just don't use it day in and day out until I started doing a lot of this drawing stuff, and I'm like, And like, and again, it's one of those funny things where you'd be like, oh, that like now I visually see it. And it never really made sense to me when I was like 16 or 17 and I see it visually moving and I'm like, totally checks
Oh,
out. Makes sense now what that's
yeah, yeah,
doing.
yeah.
So,
Well, and you brought up another point earlier in the conversation where it's like this. Okay, when I go write a headless application, right? Like when I get my JSON from my mobile device to the server and back, I mean, like there's no joy in that. There's no,
no,
oh, I feel good about myself. Like there's just data.
transactional operation.
Right,
Yeah.
right. There's just data going from one place to another. There's no magic there. But man, like if I can draw this thing on this screen, like that's a tangible benefit. Like I can look at that and be impressed with myself and be like, I did something today. Right. Yeah, I get it. So and it's that feedback that developers crave, right? We crave that I did something and I did it well, and you can see the output, right? Because we're always judged on what it looks like in the output. So
the other part that I think is kind of nice about this that I never, so I have like friends that do game development and stuff like that. And I'd always like hear them talk about their code. Like, Mike, it's held together with not even duct tape. It's like an old piece of Scotch tape that we used 15 times already. But like you would see the game and it would like look beautiful and it would run well. And it was like, how could that be that bad?
right.
But again, a lot of that stuff is like doing these drawing operations and things like that.
Right.
And I am sure, absolutely positive that there are people that can do beautiful drawing code and stuff like that. But a lot of times the code that I'm writing, I'm like this doesn't look great, but it totally solves the problem. And I don't know that there's any like issues with it. So again, it's like a fun way to write code where you feel like you could kind of get in and jam. If it does what you want, if it's performant and it's not causing memory leaks or something like that, the code's just kind of like, it's good. It doesn't need to be refactored. I don't need a bunch of interfaces. I don't need a bunch of like additional, like when I think of like enterprisey type code, I don't need to do all this stuff. I just need to get in and jam and just get it out there. And it's fun. So.
Yeah. So my takeaways are this. I've got a surface, I've got a canvas, I've got some paint. Once I have these three things, then I can actually start putting elements on the canvas, whether it be rectangles or squares or stars or what cupcakes and unicorns, whatever it is that I want to put onto that screen. Once I have the canvas, the paint, and a vector, right?
Where you want it to go. Yep.
I'm off to the races. So this has definitely helped me personally get over some of the Skia woes that I have. As a matter of fact, the project that I'm working on, we just added some Skia in like about a month ago, and I was talking to the developer about it that put it in. He's like, "Oh yeah, Rodney, like I understand it well enough." And I'm like, "Man, I just like I see the code you wrote, and like it makes sense when I see the code you wrote. But if you would have asked me to write it, I'd be like, I don't know how to put a circle, but like now I feel better because like now I understand. Like it's just an arc that's 360 degrees. Like I get that. I know that a circle is 360 degrees. So like that you're not breaking my mental model anymore. You're just giving me the parameters in which my mental model has to work.
Right. Yeah. So it's
awesome.
It's a lot. Yeah. A lot. If you break it down into those small parts, a lot easier to get your head around for sure.
Yeah. Well, like everything that we do, right? Like if I look at the entire feature, the entire program that I have to write, it's way too much for my brain to conceptualize. But the second you say, "Hey, Rodney, just go put this button on this page," I can do that. That's one pull request, one simple thing. I did it. Hey, Rodney, make this button move from side to side. I can do that. But if you want to show me a whole screen,
3 pages of documentation, it's like your eyes will glaze over.
Yeah. It's like,
and if you just read it sentence by sentence and pull it out into bullet points, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad. So what you've given me is an understanding that it's nowhere near as bad as I thought. There are a couple of simple components that I can use to get started. And at that point, it's legitimately just take a picture, any picture that you have seen that you want to try and draw and draw it. And for me, that's going to be as simple as, hey, I got a button that I want to draw, right? With some font in it, with some special font. And if I can do that, then I can start to build on that. Oh, I can do more. And I think that kind of opens up the door for somebody like me who is just, honestly, I was just scared to get into it because it just seems so overwhelming.
And that's actually a great point that I meant to bring up earlier is probably don't go into it with no direction. Like if you're just like, I'll just draw something, you'll never end up building something and you'll probably get frustrated or something like that. Come into it with this idea of, I saw this cool thing, I want to make it. Or, like I was looking at this application and I saw this design element that they had a button or some control. How do I make that? And it gives you something to iterate on to figure out like, ooh, they did this. And then it draws this on top of it.
Right.
Have a good thing to work on because again, it gives you something to hone in on your skills with, but also gives you like that sense of satisfaction at the end. Like I built this control. It's the thing that I wanted. Here it is. I could work with it.
Nice. Awesome, Mike. Well, this has been a great conversation for me, and it seems like people in the chat are thrilled about it. So thank you for your time as always, Mike. When are you going to come back? What are you going to show me next time? What are you going to teach me?
I'll talk to you in 10 minutes after this, and I'll tell you about all the other ideas that I have. So I'm always glad to be here whenever you guys will have me.
Oh man, look, you can come back every month as far as I'm concerned. Like, we can even make like a segment like learning with Mike Stonis, right? Like it'd be great.
Sounds good to me, man. I'll be in.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mike. Thank you everybody for watching. And this has been another episode of Inside.net where we learned about how to deal with Skia in MAUI.